What is the nature of a gateway? We would hardly stand and admire a gateway and think about, oh, how wonderful it is. No, a gateway is something through which we go. That's the very nature of a gateway. It gives us access to what lies behind. And this helps us to understand a very important saying of the prophet, which is, I am the city of knowledge, and Ali is the gateway. So it is through Ali that we are to access that knowledge which was the prophet himself. So the prophet is that city of knowledge. He possesses that knowledge. He is constantly there as a token for us, not just of the outer dimensions, the outer meanings of the Quran, of the guidance of God, but also of the inner meanings too. But more than that, we are told that when the prophet was taken up on his night journey into the presence of God, that he was taught there elements of knowledge, things that were known only to God. And he said, some of these I am to convey to all the people. Some of this I am only to convey to selected people. And some is of such a great weight that I am to keep it secret only to myself. So in this sense, the prophet as the city of knowledge stands out in a completely unique position in relation between God and humankind. And yet the prophet tells us, I am the city of knowledge and Ali is the gateway. Therefore, that gateway is there to give access for human beings to walk through in order to access that knowledge which the prophet holds. Some of that knowledge, he says, is for me to convey to all the people. Some is only for a select group, and some is so secret I am to keep it only to myself. Now, when we think then of the prophet as the city of knowledge, then we need to access that knowledge which he has. And he has knowledge not only of the outward rituals of Islam, the outward practice of that way of Islam which will bring the human being, the human community to fulfillment in this life and in the life to come, but he also has knowledge of that inner dimension. Sometimes we call that inner dimension the mystical pathway, the pathway of the human heart seeking intimate knowledge of God, not knowledge of the head, but knowledge rather intuitively, knowledge of the heart which knows in a much deeper sense, in a more profound sense of wisdom than just rational knowledge that we contain in our heads. That is the inner knowledge to which Ali is also the gateway in the mystical tradition. Within the Sufi tradition, we understand this mystical knowledge to be the process, the pattern, the way of irfan. Irfan is journeying through Ali to access inner mystical relationship with God. All the way from the very earliest times of Islam, the times of the Prophet himself, there were those people who sought this intimate inner relationship, this intuitive relationship with God. Now, we remember that in the early days of the prophet in Mecca, he orientated his community on Jerusalem when they were at prayer. And when it was possible, he orientated them in such a way that they could pray, as it were, through the Kaaba toward Jerusalem. But when they moved to Medina, then he continued to orientate them toward Jerusalem in prayer until a verse was revealed. And this verse was revealed about 16 months into the time in Medina. And that was the verse that set the Qibla. And it set the Qibla on the Kaaba in Mecca. And so we have in Medina the mosque of the two Qiblas. And this was the mosque in which the Prophet was leading prayers when the revelation came to him, and he ordered the congregation to turn and to face toward the Kaaba in Mecca. But in the Prophet's own mosque in Medina, he had to establish a new direction because they also, of course, had to face toward the Kaaba. Now, we know that in the old orientation toward Jerusalem, there was an alcove built on the end of the mosque. It was a kind of mihrab, and in that mihrab now they put benches, and that was where the Prophet would sit in order to give wise counsel to people. So the Qibla was now the other end of his mosque, but the old Qibla was there on the Jerusalem end. And we're told that it was on the benches in the old Qibla of the Prophet's mosque that people would come in order to be instructed and to be passed on that inner mystical dimension of the practices of Islam that would lead the human heart and soul into a divine embrace. That inner mystical dimension is the way of irfan. And when we read the scholars and masters and practitioners of irfan, they are always pointing toward the Ahl al-Bayt. They are always pointing toward Imam Ali. Imam Ali was the one who was sitting beside the Prophet, being instructed in these inner dimensions, and he therefore was able to pass it on to a gathering that gathered around him. So he becomes the guide to those who would sit and listen to his teaching. They in turn become the guides of the next generation, and so on, so that in every generation, those who would go the inner mystical path of irfan are actually following in the footsteps of the Ahl al-Bayt, following in the footsteps of Imam Ali, passing through the gateway into that knowledge which is the Prophet himself, to bring people into that deeper spiritual communion with God. So Islam is a way not just of the outer world, not just of the outer practices of prayer and fasting and justice and charity and compassion for those in need, but also it's the inner spiritual path. It is to lift the soul, the essence of each individual, into a divine embrace, to bring one into that closest of all possible relationships in this world, which is that divine knowledge. And Ali is the gateway through which that can be accessed.